Where do thoughts come from? Introduction: The Unseen Architect. Every book you've read, every building you've entered, every civilization you've known, all began with a thought. But what is a thought? Where does it arise from? How does the ethereal pulse of a fleeting idea evolve into a novel, a theory, a revolution, or a world? The origin of thought is one of the most profound mysteries of human existence. We often take it for granted that we think, imagine, and create. Yet to truly understand the nature of thought is to approach the very boundary between the seen and the unseen, the personal and the universal, the brain and the soul. In this exploration, we will journey through neuroscience, quantum physics, Jungian psychology, Eastern metaphysics, artificial intelligence, and esoteric philosophy to explore the birth of thought, the mechanics of imagination, and how consciousness manifests in a reality into form. We will ask questions that lead us not only into the mechanics of the brain, but into the very mystery of being. Part 1: The mechanism, how the brain thinks. From the standpoint of neuroscience, thoughts are often described as electrochemical signals between neurons. With roughly 86 billion neurons in the human brain, each making up to 10,000 connections, synapses, with others, the brain is an unimaginably complex web of potential activity. When we think, we are experiencing certain patterns of neural activity firing across networks associated with memory, prediction, and meaning-making. But this is only the mechanical description. It does not explain why certain thoughts arise, nor does it explain how consciousness observes them. Neuroscience cannot fully explain the subjective quality of thoughts, the qualia, or what it's like to think, imagine, or be aware of our own thinking. This is known as the hard problem of consciousness, famously articulated by philosopher David Chalmers. If neurons fire when we think, that's a correlation, not a cause. It is like saying a light switch causes the sunrise just because it turns on at the same time. The deeper question remains: is thought generated by the brain or received through it? Part 2: The Antenna Theory of Mind. Is the brain a receiver? Some thinkers have proposed that the brain is not the source of consciousness, but rather a receiver or filter for it. This is known as the transmission theory of consciousness, dating back to William James and later popularized by Aldous Huxley and Rupert Sheldrake. Huxley proposed that the brain may act as a reducing valve, narrowing down a much vaster field of consciousness into usable, experienceable streams. This leads to an intriguing possibility. Thoughts exist out there in a kind of universal mind field, and we tune into them. This aligns with many mystical traditions. In Hindu philosophy, the Akashic field is a non-physical plane of information, a collective record of all thoughts, emotions, and events. The brain, in this model, may act like a radio, tuning into a frequency of ideas based on the individual's state of being. This also aligns with Carl Jung's idea of the collective unconscious, a psychic system shared by all humanity, containing universal archetypes, symbols, and ideas. So where do thoughts come from? Perhaps not from the skull-bound self, but from the field of being itself. Part 3: The Role of the Soul. Who is doing the thinking? If thoughts are received, who is the receiver? If we assume that we are more than the brain, then we must ask, is there a thinker behind the thoughts? This leads us into the terrain of the soul. Many spiritual traditions claim that we are souls having a human experience, not the other way around. In this view, the soul is the deeper consciousness or observer that witnesses thoughts, chooses intentions, and guides evolution through lifetimes. Some schools of thought suggest that the soul exists outside of linear time and sends down threads of experience into the present moment. That inspiration, sudden clarity, or even seemingly random ideas are downloads from the higher self or glimpses from our soul's blueprint. In this framing, the mind is the stage where thoughts are played. The soul is the author. The brain is the interpreter. But even this may be too simplistic. What if the soul itself is not individual, but a wave in a larger ocean of consciousness? Part 4. The collective mind and archetypal thought. Carl Jung suggested that much of what we think is not personal. Thoughts about love, death, war, freedom, God, they arise in every culture, every epoch. Why? Because they belong not to the individual, but to the collective psyche. He called these archetypes universal symbols and patterns of energy that reside in the collective unconscious. Jung wrote, "The ideas of the unconscious are not creations of the individual, but eternal treasures of humanity." When a writer imagines a great story, or a physicist intuits a new theory, or a mystic receives a vision, they may be tapping into something shared, timeless, and transpersonal. The mind, then, may be a portal, not just a product of biology, but a lens into the infinite imagination of the cosmos itself. Part 5. Imagination, the interface between the inner and the outer. Imagination is the crucible where thought is alchemized into vision. But what is imagination? It is more than memory, more than fantasy. Imagination is the ability to see what is not yet real and make it so. From a neurological standpoint, imagination uses the default mode network, the same brain systems involved in self-reflection, empathy, and time travel in thought. When we imagine, we simulate possibilities. But where do these possibilities originate? How do they enter the mind? When an author imagines a fictional world, they often say, "It just came to me." Where did it come from? Imagination may be the interface between the unseen world of potential and the seen world of form. It is the liminal space where vision, inspiration, and choice converge. Part 6. Thought becomes reality, the alchemy of manifestation. A thought becomes a book. A vision becomes a company. An idea becomes a war. How does this happen? This is where intention, focus, and energy come into play. In many spiritual traditions, thought is seen as creative energy. The yogic tradition teaches that manas, mind, buddhi, intellect, and chitta, memory consciousness, together shape one's destiny. In modern metaphysical language, we might say, thoughts shape vibration, and vibration attracts form. From a more grounded standpoint, the path from idea to reality involves 1. Conception, the birth of the idea. 2. Emotion, the fuel behind it. 3. Belief, the internal permission to act. 4. Action, the translation into form. In the case of a book, a whisper of an idea becomes an outline, that becomes chapters, that becomes a manuscript, that becomes a printed form in the world, and then it enters the minds of others, thought multiplied. Thought is contagious. Reality is shaped by collective imagination. Part 7. Quantum possibilities, mind as observer. Quantum physics adds a new dimension to the conversation. The observer effect shows that the act of observation influences the behavior of particles. Before measurement, particles exist in a superposition, all possible states. Observation collapses the wave function into one. This implies that consciousness may play a role in shaping reality. Physicist John Wheeler proposed a participatory universe, where the observer is not separate from reality, but fundamental to its formation. What if thoughts, especially focused, intentional, emotionally charged thoughts, are not just passive but formative? In this case, imagination is not fantasy, but the blueprint of emerging reality. Part 8. Artificial intelligence and the mirror of mind. Now we build machines that can think, but do they? AI systems, like the one writing this, mimic human thought. They predict, infer, generate, but they do not feel, they do not dream, they do not imagine in the human sense. Still, AI reveals much about thought. It shows us that patterns, data, and context can simulate meaning, but it also shows us what thought is not. It is not mere computation. Human thought emerges from emotion, subjectivity, longing, presence, and mystery. It is not only cognitive, it is existential. What AI lacks is qualia, the inner experience of being. So, while AI may generate language that sounds poetic or insightful, it does not know what a thought feels like. This comparison helps clarify that real thinking is not just pattern recognition, but an act of consciousness navigating time, selfhood, and potential. Part 9. The Forgotten Origins, Thought and Reincarnation. Some traditions, especially in Buddhism and Hinduism, view thoughts as karmic echoes. The mind, in this view, is not a blank slate, but a repository of impressions carried over lifetimes. The vasanas, subtle tendencies, and samskaras, mental imprints, shape the thoughts we are prone to. This means many of our thoughts are not ours in a personal sense, but echoes from previous forms of self. If you suddenly feel inspired to write music, or study medicine, or help others, is that random? Or are you picking up where you left off lifetimes ago? In this view, thought is the evolutionary momentum of the soul, continuing its journey through time. Part 10. The mystery remains. Who thinks the first thought? We have explored mechanisms, metaphysics, and minefields. But one question remains unanswered. Who thinks the first thought? Who thinks the thought before the brain forms, before language, before self-awareness? What is the origin of origin? Some traditions point to pure consciousness, a field of awareness that precedes thought and self. The Upanishads say, that which cannot be thought with the mind, but that by which the mind thinks, know that alone as Brahman. In this view, thought is not primary, awareness is. Thought is the ripple, awareness is the ocean. And yet, without thought, no universe could arise. So perhaps the first thought was not a word, but a pulse. I am. Conclusion, the sacred engine of thought. Thought is more than neurons. It is the interface between soul and world, between potential and form, between self and other. It is the sacred engine by which we navigate this strange theater of life, building dreams, collapsing illusions, weaving meaning. To wonder where thoughts come from is to ask, who are we? What is this world? What is the source of meaning? We may never fully answer it, but we can live in reverence to the mystery and shape our lives with the courage to think thoughts that build, heal, liberate, and love. Because one thought, just one, can change everything.